You're listening to the Dibbly-Dobbly podcast. Remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Let's talk about Test cricket in Australia, Jehan, and talk about its popularity, whether or not it's still popular amongst fans. What are your thoughts on that, Jehan? Do you think it's still popular? Or do you think it's diminishing slightly?
It may be diminishing slightly. I think you still get good crowds that go to the test matches, as well as good television viewership, particularly during the holiday period, so Christmas and New Year's. I went to the Perth test match at Optus against the West Indies last year, and I wasn't expecting too many people to be there, but there was a reasonable crowd. It obviously wasn't full. It probably wasn't even half full. But I think it also depends on the team that's touring. So if India are playing, if England are playing, you're going to get full houses. If the team is reasonably competitive, then you are going to get fuller crowds and more viewership. Yep. Even teams like when Pakistan have toured, they've generally lost, but they've had their moments. They played reasonably well. Other teams like Sri Lanka tend to come and get hammered every time they come here. Who else? You could say the same about the West Indies. So when those teams come over, I don't think you're going to get quite the same crowds or interest. But actually, that's more of an issue with Test cricket itself rather than an Australian issue. So yeah, I think it's in reasonable shape at the moment in terms of crowd interest levels.
Yes, well, it definitely is. You still get crowds to Boxing Day and Sydney, the New Year's Test, and other parts of the country as well. It's still in a good place.
One thing I would say is I don't think there's as much interest in Test cricket that Australia play overseas these days. Apart from the Ashes is probably an exception to that.
And probably India.
Yeah, maybe India. Do you reckon when Australia were touring India that a lot of fans were watching that series?
Probably. Because it's because it's probably the same as the Ashes, that rivalry.
Yeah.
But I get what you're saying there. Yeah. I never really thought about that, actually.
Well, one thing I've noticed since moving here is as soon as it's winter, nobody talks about cricket or even mentions it. It's like it doesn't exist anymore.
Not really, because it's mainly football. It's AFL.
Yeah. I don't know if that was different 20 years ago, though, when Steve Waugh's side were going around the world and hammering everyone.
Probably they talked about it a lot. But, you get it on the news, during the sports section, the cricket will come up and, Australia playing in South Africa at the moment and they had a good win, something like that. But, I never thought about that till you mentioned that. Obviously for the Ashes, because it's the Ashes, and many people would have stayed up late watching that. India, you would think, most people would watch that series just to see how Australia would go. Maybe in other parts of the world, I'm not sure about. But I don't really know what the numbers are for viewing figures, but also you got to remember that many people don't have pay TV, so they can't watch overseas tours. So that's a factor.
That's definitely a factor.
So whereas if you do, then you can watch it because it's not broadcasted on free-to-air TV. So that's a factor. That's definitely a factor there. I know for the Ashes, you could listen to ABC Radio because they had the Test match special feed. And obviously Channel 9 had the rights as well for free-to-air television. So if you have, and same with World Cups and T20 World Cups as well, people don't have access to pay TV in that. But it is going to be on free-to-air TV, the World Cup. on Channel 9 next month. But yeah, test matches, overseas, people can't watch it. They can't listen to it on radio or watch it if they don't have pay TV. So that's a really good point you raised there, Jehan. Yeah. So that's something that needs to try and fix itself in terms of that accessibility. But usually when Australia tour overseas anyway, you just glance on the scores and say, oh, okay, we did well there and stuff like that. It's like this series in South Africa, really. It doesn't really mean much because it's T20 World Cup's not until next year, 50 over World Cup's not until next month. But it doesn't really have any bearing, or it's not really any significance about it. So people just don't worry about it. They just flick on, and if the World Cup's on, then you take notice. Whereas in a bilateral series, you don't really take notice.
Yeah.
So that's the case with Australia touring overseas as well. But I think mainly England, India, I think people would take an interest in that. And if Australia tour New Zealand, for example, which they will next year, maybe people have an interest in that.
Yep.
It's the same in other parts of the world as well.
Yeah, I mean, the New Zealand tour would have a similar time zone as well.
Yeah, also you've got to factor in that as well. Watching cricket in England is very difficult, especially in the other parts of the state of Australia. Not so much if you're from the West, which is a little bit easier.
Yeah.
In terms of watching cricket overseas, whereas in other parts of Australia, it's not really convenient. So, that's a very interesting point that you raised.
I think the interest is still reasonably healthy in Test cricket in this country. When South Africa came last year, they weren't really too competitive, but we still got good crowds for the matches.
Yeah, we did.
And the interest was there, I thought.
Yeah, it's certainly alive and well here, but in other parts of the world, it's a very difficult sort of challenge for those other countries, which it hasn't really done well. But it's still in a good place. People still love their Test cricket, and they want to watch it and see Australia win and do well. So it's in a good place, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Hi everyone, hope you enjoyed listening to Jehan and I discuss Test cricket in Australia. If you're listening to this episode of the podcast on our YouTube channel, let us know in the comments some of your thoughts on Test cricket in Australia. We would love to hear what you have to say.